I feel like what I do now is I solve problems using my legal skills, right? That's a difference than practicing law from the standpoint of, now I'm at a point where I have a good understanding of our business, right? And what our objectives are. And so what I try to do is listen to my legal advice, right? Either from my team or from my outside lawyers and say, okay, how do I solve this business problem, right? And I understand that the confines of the law. How do we bring this to bear?
Welcome to Becoming the GC, the podcast that dives deep into the journeys of general counsels and chief legal officers, uncovering the insights and strategies that help define their success. Hosted by Joe Schul, founder of Inside Counsel Academy. We share real-life stories and practical advice from successful GCs, guiding you on your journey to the top. Tune in and discover what it takes to become the exceptional legal leader your organization needs.
This is Joe Schul. Today's guest is C.E. Rhodes, the general counsel of Frost Bank in Texas, and I know you're going to love hearing his story. We talk about how a pivotal moment in his childhood and his love for his parents led to his pursuit of a career in law. We'll also talk about how a serious football injury in high school led to his becoming a Jefferson scholarship student at the University of Virginia. And we'll talk about how a pair of shoes led to his first legal job. Stay with me to the end, and I'll share my biggest takeaways. Here's CE's bio. C.E. Rhodes serves as Group Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary for Cullen Frost Bankers, Inc. and Frost Bank. He leads both the legal and real estate departments. Mr. Rhodes has more than 25 years of legal experience. In addition, he has served on the boards of the State Bar of Texas, the Texas Bar Foundation, and the Jefferson Scholars Foundation. He holds a JD degree from Emory University School of Law and a BA from the University of Virginia. So with that, let's get to the interview. CE, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Joe.
It's great to have you here. Where are you zooming in from?
I'm zooming in this afternoon from Dallas, Texas. So I have meetings tomorrow at one of our locations here. And so just got in today. So here in Dallas.
Okay. And what's your normal home base? Is that Houston?
I'm based in San Antonio. Frost is headquartered in San Antonio, but I travel quite a bit across the state to both Dallas and Houston primarily. I am the, quote, executive sponsor for the Dallas area. So I get to Dallas generally about once a month.
Okay, great. And take me back in time. What inspired your career in law?
Joe, I think a lot of people, some people know they want to go when they're young. Other people kind of discover it later in life. I was more of the former. One of the memories that I have is I was probably about 8 or 9 years old. I grew up in rural Virginia, Lynchburg, just outside of Lynchburg, small town called Evington, Virginia. And in the rural communities, it was common for someone to come out and sell you life insurance. And so I recall my folks sitting around the table, and Danny Landers, who was the insurance guy, came out to sell them life insurance. And I remember my folks signing some documents, and Danny left, and they were kind of still sitting around the table and just trying to really understand what they had just signed. And it was at that moment for me, I realized that I never wanted anyone to put a piece of paper in front of my folks and they not know what it meant. And so my folks had some college education, but, that just resonated with me. And so, although, what I do today has nothing to do with interpreting documents for my mother or my dad, at least formally, right? I still am happy with the choice.
Wow, that gave me the chills when you said that. And I think about in our roles as GCs where we have some ability to, influence things. Does it impact, sort of your approach to what you're putting in front of consumers?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to, that initial reaction was to help my folks. And today, in my role as GC, it's the same. It's just not helping my people, it's helping others, right? In addition to helping my parents. And so I always try to approach it in that manner, right? From a very humble sense. And when we're writing contracts, are we trying to use plain language? You know, a lot of times you got to have some disclosures and disclaimers in there, but is it plain language? And is it something, again, to your point, that I can put in front of my mother or father and they generally get the gist of what it is that they're signing? That's what I want to do.
Love that. And certainly in the industry that you're in, there's a lot of mandated disclosures, et cetera.
Right.
But it's good to hear that you're mindful of that when putting documents in front of people or deciding what's going to go in front of people, et cetera. So take me from that kitchen table to your path through college and then law school and your first attorney job.
Yeah. So prior to my senior year in high school, if anyone asked me what would be my path to college, I would have said football. I was a football player. I was a good football player. I'm also the oldest of 4 kids, and it's 17 years between me and the youngest. So same 2 parents. But it was really important to me to go to school and my parents not have to pay for it. My senior year, I broke my collarbone, which back then in the 90s, you had to have a reasonably good senior year before they offered you a scholarship. It was pretty rare to
Did you
get
get hurt playing football?
I did, and had surgery the very next day on my 17th birthday.
Oh.
So mentally, obviously, that was really tough. There was a guidance counselor, Kathy Kaplan, who came across the Jefferson scholarship and said, "CE, I read this, and I think you're perfect for it." It was a full scholarship to the University of Virginia based upon demonstrated excellence in leadership, scholarship, and citizenship. And it was an application process. You had to be nominated by your counselor. You had to go through interviews at your school and through the region, and ultimately a final weekend in Charlottesville. And I was one of, I don't know, 23 or 24. It's roughly 1% of the entering class gets offered a Jefferson scholarship. And so I did, and I remember that week waiting. Back then there was no email, right? You had to wait actually for the envelope to come in the mail. And so I remember getting the envelope and going to my high school because my mother worked at my high school. She worked in the library. She was a librarian assistant, and I remember sitting out in the parking lot and opening the letter, being super excited, and then walked inside and opened it with my mother again. And so she was really excited. So it was
You got the
not
thick
the path.
envelope.
That's correct. I got the thick envelope, right? And so I ended up going to University of Virginia, but when I made the decision and I found out about the scholarship, the football coaches at Virginia had stayed in contact, and they said, "Hey, keep us posted. We have nothing to do with the scholarship, but we'd love to have you play if you get the scholarship. We just don't have a scholarship for you." And so I did. So I contacted them, and I was on campus, several weeks before people got there, and was part of kind of that entering class of '93, and went to the University of Virginia and got my undergraduate degree in history, played football for 3 years, redshirted my first year, played in travel and ran the ball my second year. My third year, played and traveled, primarily special teams, but wonderful experience. My closest friends to this day are all guys that, some of my closest friends today are guys that I played football with.
Now, as a recipient of a Jefferson scholarship, did that mean you got to live in those cool dorms that are right around the quad there?
So several of my Jefferson Scholar classmates did live on the lawn. I did not. So that's an application process, and they take not only just the brightest of the brightest, but some of the people that have done and made tremendous contributions to the university while they were there. So I didn't apply to live on the lawn. In fact, my third year, I signed a 2-year lease with 2 guys I played football with to live off campus. And plus the idea of walking out in a towel in the middle of December
Right.
to take a shower and to get logs just didn't interest me. But, kind of in hindsight, it's a tremendous honor, right? And I have friends that did it and super proud of them and their accomplishments and what that means.
It's kind of a unique thing, and, but yeah, not a lot of privacy.
Not at all. There's always somebody knocking on your door, and there always seems to be, some type of event on the lawn and students running there after an adult beverage or two around 1 or 2 in the morning. So it could be difficult to get to sleep.
Right on. Right on. Okay, so then how'd you get from there to law school? Like, when did you decide that that was gonna be your path?
Yeah. So after my, which would have been my third year at UVA, I kind of decided, and I knew that all I ever wanted to do was play major college football. So I never really, after about eight, where everyone wants to go to the NFL, I really looked at it and said, football was really for me just to play major college football. And I've done that. I'm very excited and I want to go to law school. And so, the football office had been great and that they helped set up internships, during the summer because I was pretty far ahead, so I didn't need to take classes in order to graduate during the summer. So I said, "Hey, look, if you guys can help me with an internship." So they actually, set me up with an internship, at a bank, and, I never would have thought I'd end up in a bank, 30 years later, but that's life, right? So they set me up with an internship with a bank, and that went well, and that also carried over that next year. So I knew that I could work, kind of my final year in school at the bank, study for the LSAT, which I did. So I took the LSAT without taking a prep course, which I do not recommend to any young person. If you're interested in going to law school, take the prep course. But I had a law school professor at he wasn't my law school professor, but he's a law school professor who used to work out in the football facility. And Alex was funny guy, and I said, "Hey, look, I'm thinking about going to law school." And so he said, "Look, take these old exams, study these old exams. If you want to do a prep course, you can." And I was like, "Alex, I don't have money for a prep course." So he said, "Study these old exams." So I did that, took the LSAT, and got to Emory, and so ended up going to Atlanta, and that's kind of what led me to law school. And ironically, it was also the last place where I played a football game in Atlanta, so I was super excited to make the move.
I'm a few years older than you. I also didn't take a LSAT prep course. I went to the, I don't know, Borders bookstore or something and got, the book and
Yeah,
read through it in advance. But, now it's like a whole industry to get ready. And you can take it multiple times. And,
right.
the
Yeah,
kids
I didn't
today
have
have it
that
so much
option.
easier.
Yeah, it was a one shot deal for me. I'm like, I got to save up my money, take this
Same.
test, and then we'll roll with it, and
There's
I
something
will be
there's
what I'm
something
supposed
to
to be.
that, to having that pressure and, to perform at your best, right? Because you sort of have to. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, well, that's great. And so you went down to Atlanta, and then how did you find law school? Did you enjoy it?
So law school for me, and I went straight through, right? And
Yep.
that's the other thing I think that I would encourage young students is to take a year off, right? And I think you need that break, whether it's to travel or just something, just gives you a little bit of life experience. I think I was so focused on not getting a job by 25, but I wanted a career. So I was really driven to go straight to law school. And in law school, I thought philosophically it was interesting. But my first year I really didn't know how to study, right? For law school. I didn't know any lawyers when I was growing up. There weren't, lawyers in my family. I mean, I mentioned Alex, but he had just kind of helped me with the LSAT. So I didn't really know that. And I didn't really understand legal writing. And it wasn't until I did okay my first semester. I could have done better. I did better my second semester, right? Improvement, and I got it. And that first summer, I clerked in the DA's office in Manhattan. I was able to get a job there, and luckily for me, I had that aunt that lives in Manhattan, so I didn't have to worry about living expenses. And I think I was only getting like $6 an hour, some public interest deal that they were giving me. So
Yeah.
I wasn't getting paid a
Wow.
lot of money. Who was fixing my lunch every day and gave me a roof over my head. And all I had to do was take the subway down to the office. But that's where I learned how to write. truly understand legal writing. And the thing I would say to law schools and to law school students, law school is great theory, but it's not practice. And you really have to, it's called practice for a reason, right? I think about football. If you want to perform well on Saturdays in college, our head coach used to say, you got to practice perfect Monday through Friday, right? And so much of law school I thought was, kind of gave you the theory. You need to understand the theory. And I tell students all the time, law school is a marathon, not a race, right? So don't try to run out as fast as you can and burn yourself out, right? Just know that the end game isn't necessarily to graduate from law school, but the end game is to pass the bar, right? And then once you're licensed, it doesn't matter whether you're top of the class, whether you're bottom of the class, after your name it says JD or ESQ, Esquire, right? So that is the name of the game. And if you practice well and you practice good habits, the smartest lawyers aren't always the best lawyers. The best lawyers are the ones that work the hardest. Intelligence matters. Yeah, no one's discounting that. But if you work really hard, you can be very successful in this career.
How did you learn to write? You said you learned to write in that job. Was it from watching and emulating others, or did you have somebody who was willing to take the time to put red all over your paper and show you the better way to do it?
I was in the appellate section. So they would ask me to write different things, and there would be templates and formats, and I would see that, and I would, that's when it kinds of click. Like in the classroom, you're just kind of doing things, but see it in practice, understand what we were doing and why it mattered on behalf of the state really resonated with me. But I also did have a mentor when I was there that was just great at marking up the paper, right? And the red and providing me great feedback and say, well, think about saying it this way and here's why.
Yeah.
Or what's another way, and challenging me to think, right? Different ways. But really having kind of those templates and, just understanding, how to write was immensely important to me and beneficial because I came back that second year and, whereas the first year I felt like I was crawling to run. I mean, I was in a full sprint second year, right? Like I got it, right? Like I could be in the classroom and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, here's what I'm looking for, boom, boom, boom. Here's what matters and take it and I could write the exam, right? So much of law school is, for many first years that are first gen, you're trying to figure out, you're reading cases and you don't know what you're looking for, right? Or someone says the holding, right? So you spend hours reading the case or briefing the case, not knowing, okay, well, for me, it was like, okay, let me read the holding first, right? Here's what the court decided. Then let me go back and understand how they got there, right? But it took me a year to kind of figure that out, right? Different people learn differently. And for me, it was like, okay, here's a case, here's what it was about, here's what they held, but what were the facts and the rationale to get them to the end game? And once I started to do that, for me, it just clicked.
Awesome. Okay, great. So then your first non-internship job out of law school. Tell me about that.
Again, I go back to a lot of things my parents and grandparents would say, but it's not always about what you know, it's who you know. And I think honestly, it's been a combination of both for me. So I got my first job in Houston, and people say, "Well, CE, how'd you end up in Houston when you had no family or no ties?" I had clerked there the end of my second summer, part of the summer. But I tell people the short answer is a pair of shoes, and they laugh. And I said, "Well, I'm not trying to be smart, but the reality is, Emory had this trial techniques program that was mandatory for all 2L students at the end of your second year. And they flew in lawyers and judges from across the country and Canada to teach 2Ls how to try cases. And it was trial by doing. So, it's very much the NITA method, right? The National Institute of Trial Advocacy method. So you're on your feet doing a closing, you're doing an opening, you're directing, you're crossing witnesses. And I remember in my 1L year, they had said, "Hey, look, this takes place 2 weeks after classes end. If you're interested, you should, apply. It's a great way to meet lawyers and judges." And so my 1L year, I said, "Okay, let me look into this." And so I did. And so we were assigned odd jobs, everything from, slicing bagels in the morning for the lawyers and judges when they came in to teach the course, or driving a van that picked them up at the hotel, which is right down the street, and drive them down to law school every day. And so one day I was driving the van. This little lady with a strong Louisiana accent said, "Hey, do you know where I can find a pair of sneakers?" And I said, "Sure." And she probably didn't say sneakers. She probably said shoes, living down south, right? Sneakers more of a, I guess a northern term. And so she said, "Do you know where I can find some shoes?" I said, "Yeah, there's a mall right around the street. Technically, I'm supposed to take you from point A, the hotel, to the law school, point B, but meet me here at this time and I'll take you down there." Right. So, little lesson. Sometimes it's okay to bend the rules, right? And not be so rigid. And so I picked her up and drove her down and drove her back. And the whole time we did not talk about the law. We talked about our families. We talked about sports. We talked about just a variety of things, but nothing that had to do with law school. What are your grades? What courses you're taking, had nothing to do with that. And as I was dropping her off, she said, "Hey, here's my card. I really like you. I would love for you to apply for my firm." And so that summer, I was my first year. I was in New York. I called her up. I said, "Hey, got my resume ready. Send it down." She was at a law firm, a large law firm in Dallas that also had an office in Houston. She set up interviews at both places. So I went to the home office in Dallas, and then I went to the smaller office at the time, but growing office in Houston that probably had 60 and grew to over 100 when I was there, and then came back and got the offer. And so for me, the opportunity was I ended up going out there clerking for part of the summer. I'd clerked with a firm in Atlanta and this firm in Houston, and it just felt right. Like I remember walking down the streets to from the parking garage to the law firm. And first thing you know about Houston in the summertime is no one walks down the street. Everyone's in tunnels. So so downtown is connected by an underground tunnel system. So I remember walking down the street, and I'm like, "Man, 1, it's really hot and I'm sweating,
Where
and
is
2, there's
everybody?
yeah, 2, there's nobody on the street," right? But kind of visualizing myself, though, is this a place where I could be? Is this a place I can work? And I did that visualization every day that I was there, right? And at the end of the summer, I'm like, "Yeah, I could see myself there, even without having any roots or ties."
And this is Haynes and Boone, right?
Correct. This is
Okay. Yeah.
Haynes and
Since
Boone
it
in
all
Houston.
worked out well, I'll
It it
say
it
who it
it
was.
worked out extremely well, and
Yeah. Nice.
and that experience, one, later that summer, I figured out the tunnel system. At least I had to get to the garage to my office, right? And just opened up a whole new world, but had great experiences, worked with great people. One of my mentors, that took over kinda, that summer was phenomenal, really instrumental in helping me be the lawyer that I am today.
Were you in the litigation group or the corporate group or something
Now,
else?
I was a litigator. I joke with people and say litigator by birth, transactional lawyer by choice. Um, and I remember I had clerked at a firm in Atlanta, and I had a corporate partner tell me, "Hey, CE, you really should look at corporate law." And I'm like, "No, I don't want to look at documents all day. I want to be in the courtroom." And I wish I would have listened because his words were to me, he's like, "Hey, you've got the right mindset. You've got a business mindset. You want to get things done. You're the type of guy that you don't come across as being very adversarial all the time. And so you've got the right mindset that I think would be super for corporate." And I didn't listen.
Yet,
I wish I would have, right?
but you
And
did over
that's
time.
right. Yeah, I did, right? And
Okay.
life takes you where it takes you, right? And so you just, gotta be prepared for it. So,
And
business litigation at Haynes& Boone.
yeah, I'm sure that experience makes you a better corporate lawyer to have
A
to have had
thousand
to have
percent,
seen it
a
from that
thousand
perspective.
percent. I
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember, interviewing at different places or interviewing folks, and folks like, or talking to recruiters, and I said, "Oh, well, you're a litigator. No one wants to talk to a litigator." And my mind said, "Well, but I also look at documents, right? I may not look at deal documents, but I do look at settlement agreements, right? And I do have to, critique the words, and I argue all day over language and over words,
Right.
right? So I think it makes me a better drafter because I know where the pain points are going to be. And also from the perspective of I'm also able to look at situations and advise clients, "Hey, here's what you can expect the issue will be down the road if it gets to litigation, right? No one wants to think about litigation. And not only here's how it'll be, but at Haynes and Boone, I was fortunate enough to get trial experience in the courtroom. I can say, here's likely what the judge or the jury will pick up on, right? And so I try to advise my client is that we always want to be perceived as wearing the white hat from start to finish, right? And so it's really important that you think about, while you're doing what you're doing, and are you doing it for the right reason from beginning to end, right? Because that helps you tell the story. If you ever have to get to the courtroom, again, no one wants to get there, but if you have to get to the courtroom, you got a great story to tell, and people will relate to our jury will be able to relate to it.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And so then when you went from the law firm to your first in-house job, did you go in as a litigator or was it a more general role?
No, so I remember I just finished a very long arbitration, and I got a voicemail. It said, "CE, this is Rob Rowland, General Counsel of America. I'd like to, talk to you." And I thought, maybe it's a potential client. I had no idea what Rob did, and Rob was a recruiter. And Rob said, "CE, how would you like to work for a Fortune 500 company and travel the world?" And I said, "Rob, where's the job?" He said, "Houston." I said, "Tell me more." So that's what started, a 12-year career at Baker Hughes. And the job I was hired to do was FCPA audits and investigations around the world. So think Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. My job was to make sure that our employees and agents did not bribe foreign officials. And the coolest job I've ever had, but I'll say, and I say this to young lawyers all the time, sometimes you're not hired for what you've done, but you've hired for the skills to be able to bring it to the job that they're asking you to do, right? And so I had, zero FCPA experience, right? I had taken a course on corporate crimes in law school, but I had written a paper at the request of a corporate partner at Haynes and Boone about, of all things, document retention. And the title was like Corporate Compliance in a Post-Enron World, right? So after 2001, all the shredding of documents between Enron and Arthur Andersen, all that kind of stuff, we had written this paper that was published. And so Rob, this recruiter, had ran my name and saw CE Rhodes in compliance and called me. So the compliance that I wrote about had nothing to do with the job I was hired to do. But like any lawyer, you start to prepare. So I started reading about what the job was, and I read up on the FCPA, and I had this skill set, this litigation skill set. But I also had that skill set that had been identified by the lawyer before, and that I had the ability to talk to people and put them at ease, where it didn't come across as being adversarial, where they didn't feel like they were given a deposition, where they felt like they were sitting in the living room and we were just talking about these issues, right? And the ability to do that, one, and then the ability to appreciate and understand and really be curious about different cultures around the world. And Baker Hughes literally did take me around the world. I think my first assignment was in China, and I'd been all through South America and the Middle East and Southeast Asia. But being curious about people and their home and where they're from, and being authentic with that curiosity has just always helped me tremendously get more information, right? When I was in that role. But then when I moved on from compliance to be a GC of one of our subsidiaries, and then the US region, and then over in Dubai, over the Middle East, Asia, and Australia, the ability to connect with people and to be authentic and to be curious about them and what they're doing, and curious about the business and the challenges that they're facing, and also not come at it from a American centric point of view, right? Saying, well, this is how we got to do it. No, I had team members and I had to rely on them. Okay, well, help me understand the challenges and the hurdles, right? And never anything that was unethical or illegal, but just understanding not everything works like it does in the US, right?
Sure.
And if you think it's got to be done this way, well, you'll never get anywhere, right? You have to be open to understanding how things are done differently.
Right. Wow. And it's been an interesting year for FCPA enforcement
That's,
generally, because I mean, Trump
that's
called
right.
the whole thing off, and
That's right.
I actually don't know where it sits right now, but yeah, it's a fascinating area, and the whole history behind that in the 1970s when the FCPA was passed, I find very interesting because of the, like you said, the cross cultural,
Right.
considerations. Yeah,
And I was hired. Baker Hughes was building out his compliance program because they had stubbed their toe a couple times. And so they had a GC that had been there, a couple of years. The chief compliance officer that had just been brought on maybe a year or two before, and they were really building out this team. And it really was, the time I was there, it was the best in class compliance program. Jay Martin, a chief compliance officer, when we were there. I mean, Jay just built a phenomenal department and very well respected by DOJ, very well respected by other CCOs, not just around the country but around the world. We had one of the best departments, but it was one of those situations where it was born out of a problem, right?
sure.
You have an issue, you got to fix it, right? And so we even had a government monitor for part of the time when I was there, and I was the chief liaison with the monitor. And that also just gave me, again, yet a different perspective on, people and training and understanding, kind of what the government thinks, right? And the monitor was a former prosecutor, so
Mhm.
I kind of knew his mindset, or working with them, being that liaison. I was able to give better advice to my clients because I spent so much time with the monitor.
For sure, for sure. Take me through. So going from that role, which is pretty specialized,
Yep.
now you're going to become GC of a business unit. What did you have to learn and learn quickly?
I'll say this because I think this is important too for folks that are thinking about the path. So when I interviewed at Baker Hughes, my last interview was with the General Counsel, Alan Crane, and Alan at the end of the interview said, "CE, do you have any questions for me?" And I said, "Yes, Alan, just one." Said, "What do I have to do, not today, not tomorrow, but long term, be sitting on that side of the table as general counsel, whether it's here or somewhere else, right?" And he said, "Number one, do a great job for what we hired you to do. And number two, learn the business, right? You want to be a lawyer on the business side, but in order to give the best advice, you've got to know what the business does, how they make money, and what their pain points are, right?" And so that's what I focused on when I went from compliance and went over to one of our subs, was just learning the drilling fluids business. I sat in the management meetings where they're discussing, the P&L and marketing efforts, and looking at competition and looking at their customer base and understand the strategies strategically. How are we going to grow market share? What are our threats? What are our weaknesses? What's our product mix? So I spent a lot of time in this meeting just learning the business. And so, which I think is very general counsel, you got to know the business. But I think the way that you can learn it the fastest is by listening, asking great questions. Like lawyers, we're trained to learn take a lot of information, condense it down. And I think as a litigator, you get a case, you learn it, and you get a lot of depth, right? Quickly, right? You got to be able to get depth quickly, right? As a GC, you may not need as much depth, but you got to have a lot of breadth, right?
Right.
To be able to touch on a lot of things. So I don't have to be the specialist in X, right? But I got to know enough about our business and about what the risks are to ask the right question, either of the business or my outside counsel, or someone on my team, to say, "Hey, look, there's a potential issue here. I think because of here's what we're trying to go. Here's where I see the issues, and I need you to look into X," right? And so much of being a general counsel isn't about knowing what you know; it's knowing what you don't know, knowing how to ask for help from an outside lawyer or from a teammate to get that information so that the team can make the right decision.
Yeah, and I imagine your litigation training has, stuck with you in terms of you now you're in banking. So you've been able to move around industries and learn different businesses quickly. Just like you would as a litigator, you're getting up to speed on a new case. You got to learn all that anew.
Absolutely. And I think, about the move, pivoting to Frost, one of the biggest advantages I think I had was I had a very seasoned leadership team. At the time, I think my CEO had been at the company more than 35 years. Now he's more than 40. I had a CFO that had been here around the same time. A chief banking officer had been there more than 35 years, the chief credit officer at the time. So I had, probably, I would venture to say, probably 300 years of experience. And so what I did early on, I didn't focus on, of course, before I started, I knew who the outside lawyers were. So I had kind of a one-on-one with them to kind of get kind of, what am I stepping into? What are some of
Yep.
the legal issues?
Yep.
Help me understand the entities and the structures. I read the Ks and the Qs, but a lot of the banking issues, I went and took my colleagues out to lunch, and my CEO would, take me out to lunch, it seemed like, every other week initially, for the first month, just to ask questions, right? I had read something, and I want to ask questions. And how do you deal with this? Or tell me about your line of business and your unit. What are your challenges? What's your goals and objectives, strategy wise? What's kind of the plan to get there? Have you had any challenges with legal, and what are they, and how can I help? And just listing, taking a lot of stuff in. So a lot of the industry knowledge I was able to learn from my colleagues, in addition to doing everything that one would do in terms of, researching and reading and doing all that kind of stuff.
How did the Frost opportunity come about?
Yes. So I was in New York City. I was working for a natural gas to power company. And my wife is a native New Yorker. So you can imagine getting a native New Yorker to leave New York. But we had a discussion because that job in New York, I was a chief compliance officer plus, because I was the chief compliance officer, but I knew it was transitioning from a startup to an operating company. So I was doing a lot of different things, negotiating deals and a variety of other things in addition to being the chief compliance officer. But one of the reasons why I took that job was that it reported to the board. Now, I worked every day with the GC, but on paper, it reported to the board. And so I had an opportunity to interact with the board. And that was a skill set in my career up until that point. I had not had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I felt like I needed. And talking with recruiters and for my own development, I needed that experience before I could make the move to the GCC. And so with Frost, it's all about timing. And I'd love to take credit for it and said I did something great, but it wasn't. It was simply, I got a phone call from a lawyer in Virginia. We had served together on a board. He was currently on a bank board in Pennsylvania and said, "Hey, CE, the GC is about to retire. I think you're perfect for the job." And I said, "Well, George, I really don't have that much banking experience." And he said, "Well, I don't care. You've got the right personality and you're smart enough to figure it out." I said, "Okay." And so I hung up the phone. I called the only bank GC that I knew was James Waters, who was at Frost. James and I had known each other for more than 20 years from Haynes and Boone. When I had left Haynes and Boone, he was a corporate partner in Dallas. He ultimately, I think, before he took the job at Frost, he was a managing partner of the Haynes and Boone Dallas office, and he was a banking and finance guy. So he had a illustrious career. I called James up and said, "Hey, James, thinking about putting my name in the ring, a hat in the ring for a bank GC job. What can you tell me?" And James talked to me what seemed to be like 2 hours about, at the time, PPP, Paycheck Protection Program. And so he kind of got me up to speed on that, hung up the phone. 2 days later, he called me and said, "Hey, I'm leaving Frost. Would you be interested in talking to them?
Wait,
I think you'd be interested in talking to you."
you were calling him about a different bank job.
Correct. Correct. Right.
I
So
see.
timing, right?
Right.
Timing, I couldn't have planned that, the way that it worked. And so, I knew Frost. I was familiar with them. I was familiar with their culture. I was familiar with their CEO. And so everything worked out, right? And so I'm very happy. The more I read about Frost, the more I felt like it aligned with my own kind of, you know, personal belief and mantra in building relationships, long-term relationships. And the more I talk to my CEO, he's a man of tremendous faith and believes in, extending grace. And then that means, giving people opportunities maybe for folks that don't deserve it, right? Or nothing, they did nothing by their own merit, right? But, he believes that the bank should be used as a force for good in people's everyday lives. And
Wow.
that really spoke to me.
Yeah.
That the bank is a tool to really help people do better in life. And so that was really important.
Yeah. Tell us more about that. Sort of the mission.
Yeah. So the mission is we are, our mission statement is we're building long-term relationships with our customers. And so for us, it's really important from our customer perspective that we are treating people fairly, that we're treating people irrespective of whether they got $1 million or whether they got $1 in the bank. Our most important point is that we want everyone to feel significant, right? And we treat everyone with significant. And I think part of our, people wonder about our secret sauce. It's really around how we value relationships, how we are a place where people know that we're conservatively managed and that the assets are safe and sound with us. Those are a lot of the things that we talk about, not just in our marketing materials. And, we have a blue book that contains our philosophy and our mission statement and our core values of integrity, caring, and excellence. But those are things that we talk about on a daily basis in management meetings, right? And for us, every Monday morning, we have a management meeting at 8:30 with our regional leaders and our executive team. And we always start off with a story. We'd start off with a Frost story. And the stories are about how we're making people's lives better. So it's generally a customer story where a customer is called and maybe they want to thank some teller that, we had a customer, just for example, right? Maybe, we had a customer whose husband had passed away and our teller noticed that that person wasn't coming to the bank. And so they reached out and called the customer and said, "Hey, is everything okay?" And she said, "Well, yeah, I lost my husband." And our person delivered flowers to their home. Or a situation where, someone was having a really bad day and came to the bank, 2 minutes before we're closing. And rather than say, "No, we're not going to accept the transaction," we did it. Or maybe there was fraud on their account and they were having a really bad day because of the fraud.
Yeah.
And we treated them with dignity and respect and helped them through their problems. There are countless letters that not only go to the CEO, but go to, branch managers where you hear examples of that over and over. People treating people the right way with no expectation of anything in return. And we believe that if you treat people right, they will reward you. And it's not about finances and share price, all that stuff matters. But if you don't treat your customers right, none of that will matter, right?
Right.
Because if you have zero customers, you got zero business, right? And so we just really, I think as a management team, we try to walk the walk. But we have fantastic people. We got 6,000 people out there that get it, right? When people start at Frost, we put them through a training program and people are like, "Oh my goodness, you just don't throw them on the floor." No, there's week-long training about history, our culture, and our philosophy, and why we do what we do. And that all lined up with, like I said, my personal mission and my personal goals.
It really does. I mean, it's a full circle story because you're now on the leadership team of an organization that would treat your mother the way you want her to be treated. My mother,
Absolutely.
like, right?
Yep,
I mean,
absolutely.
something to be proud of, and is not, it's unusual in today's world. So I could see why that would be attractive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
It seems so mundane to move on, from that, high level mission discussion. But I want to know, just getting to know you, you're like a case study in professional development and learning. So where are you headed next? Like, what do you see as your next opportunities to grow further as an individual in the GC role or
Yeah.
outside the GC role? I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I go back to my skill set, right? What do I do every day in this chair, right? And it's not so much that I practice law anymore, because I don't. Lead, right? I lead a team and I'm part of an executive team that leads an organization, right? So just setting the right tone and showing up every day as an authentic leader, right? One who listens to my people, one who supports my team, one who congratulates, and one who motivates. One who motivates them, each team member, to be their absolute best. So I have a team of 23 people. I lead both legal and real estate, right? Which is different, right? Because not all my team are lawyers or paralegals or whatever, right? I've got a real estate team of professionals, and their job is to go out and identify locations where we might build a branch or lease, right? And so that was different. That was a different learning curve that I had to go through with them. But I love that, right? And so, I have to lead that team. So showing up every day, being a positive leader for that team and helping them be their best every day, right? That's my job, and remove obstacles. That's one. So continuing in a leadership capacity, whether that's in this position or whether it's in a business role, I don't know what opportunities may come, but I look forward to that, and I'm confident that I can do that. One, two. In addition to leadership, I feel like what I do now is I solve problems using my legal skills. Right. That's a difference than practicing law from the standpoint of now I'm at a point where I have a good understanding of our business, right? And what our objectives are. And so what I try to do is listen to my legal advice, right? Either from my team or from my outside lawyers, and say, okay, how do I solve this business problem, right? And I understand that the confines of the law, how do we bring this to bear, right? One. And then two, how do I communicate that, right? Because what you get from outside counsel or from your team might be 3 slides of information. And you're like, I don't need 3 slides. I need 3 bullet points to get this across, right? So the ability to communicate, as a trial lawyer, people think, oh, okay, you're great on your feet and doing orally. That's great. But the written word is just as powerful, right? And what my experience has taught me is you don't have to have a lot of words. In fact, you want less words when you're communicating to the board or to the executive team, because, you want each word to have meaning or have power, right? And be able to articulate that. And so that's always that's a constant skill, right? Just in the business world, right? How do I communicate everything I need to communicate effectively, and just a bullet point or two, right? I think in terms of it's either a single bullet point or 3, never any more than 5, right?
Right.
If it's more than that, then I need to have a conversation. My CEO said,
Yeah.
look, if you cannot explain to me his words, 21 words or less, then either A, you don't know what you're talking about, or B, you're trying to trick your grandmother, right? And I don't want anybody that's trying to do either one of those 2 things, right? So I'm not in the business of tricking grandmothers, so I try to just really be knowledgeable about what I'm trying to say and use those words effectively.
I love it. I love it because the more words, the less you've synthesized,
Right.
which is really what executives, want from their head of legal, synthesizing, and that, like they trust you.
Yeah, I think a lot about satisfaction in life, right? And I think for me, I I'm wired in that, one, I want to win, right? I'm a competitor, right? Whether that comes from sports, but I remember in elementary school, comparing grades with like the next person, like not in an unhealthy way, but in a healthy way, right? We were just high achievers, right? So it's like, oh, I got 99, I missed one. That person got 100. Like, what can I do to get 100 next time? Like that.
Yeah.
That competition really fuels me, right? And that does today, right? In business, right? Business is the same thing. Like, I want to win. I want our bank to be the best bank that we can be, and I want people to bank with us, right? Because I think we're the best, right? And it's our job to prove that every day to customers, right? Every day we have to prove that. And then, two, in addition to like that drive to win, I think I'm most satisfied when I achieve something to help us achieve a business goal or objectives, right? When they're like, man, we're negotiating a deal, that the naming rights of where the Spurs play, right? And it was a short amount of time, and and we got it done in the time period. And I remember the CEO from the team contacted our CEO to say, "Hey, congratulations!" And I really like the way that me and that CE and his colleague, the consumer head of our consumer bank, not only that they got it done, but how they did it with our team, right? And that's to say that sometimes you can have some really intense negotiations, but it's not about, kicking and screaming, turning over the table to get your point across, but more so about being authentic, right? You can be firm, you can be a nice guy, but you can be firm on this particular issue and get it across the finish line. And I just go back to just being your authentic self, whoever you are, show up as that person every day, right? Because then people know who you are, right? And I know how to deal with you. But if you're calm one day, you're kicking over the desk and you're yelling and screaming the next, then I don't know who I'm dealing with, right? Which version of you am I dealing with? So I try to be consistent to my management team, right? Give them great advice, be concise, so they can, to your point, so they can trust you, right? I think that the best compliment that a GC can get from a CEO or her CEO is that this is really my conciliary, right? Like, not only do I go to CE about legal issues, but I talk to CE about business issues. Or we make sure that CE is invited in these business meetings, not because he's got a big hat on that says legal, but he thinks about the business issues differently, right? Given his experience, not only as a lawyer, but as someone who hasn't been at a bank for 30 years, right? He's only been here 4, right? Or someone who's a different age or other demographic, right? So the value that you bring to the table. And those to me are the greatest compliments. And that's the most rewarding part of my job. And perhaps what's next? I continue to look for that too, right? Wherever that is, am I getting opportunities to showcase a different part of decision making, right? Maybe using my legal skills and experience, or maybe using kind of the business skills that I've acquired over, now 20 years being in the business world. I don't know what's next, right? Maybe it's me doing that stuff on my own. Who knows? Or with a partner.
Authenticity, consistency. I can't think of a better way to leave it. I've so enjoyed our conversation, and I can't wait to see what's next for you.
Thank you, Joseph, very much. I enjoyed our time and wish everyone out there the best.
Thank you, CE. Hey, thank you for listening. My takeaways from the interview with CE Rhodes are the following. I was struck by his humility and his appreciation for the people who helped him achieve his career success. And I think that is what's made him into the leader that he is. One who, as he said, listens, supports, congratulates, and motivates the people on his team. His career evolution also highlights the power of continuous learning, networking, and curiosity, not only in how it advanced himself, but also to foster meaningful relationships and drive organizational success, and ultimately, in his case, to make the world a better place. Okay, until next time, this is Joe Scholl. I'd love to connect with any in-house lawyers or outside lawyers who serve in-house lawyers who are interested in maximizing their potential. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn and let's start a conversation. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Becoming the GC. Whether you're preparing for the GC role or looking to sharpen your skills as a sitting general counsel, we hope this episode offered valuable insights and inspiration. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Explore more resources and join our community at InsideCounselAcademy.com. Please tune in next time for more insights and inspiring stories from successful legal leaders.